coming to the education track today. My name is Carey Gibson, and I'm one of the implementation managers and project managers for Agiloft. I work out of my office in Charlottesville, Virginia, and I'm pleased to introduce to you today to Ellen Borowiak, who is the Contracts Program Manager for St. Louis University. I first met Ellen back in the fall of 2017 as SLU began its Agiloft implementation adventure. I was the project manager for their project along with Craig Gordon. And Ellen acted as sort of the project manager on the SLU side and was tasked with coordinating and building a CLM solution that could standardize the process really across hundreds of departments across the university, as well as remaining flexible enough to meet those really distinct departmental needs. She also spearheaded the efforts to get consensus on all of the different kinds of approvals that were required for different departments and different contract types, as well as figuring out all of the signature authority pieces for who could sign for which contract types, for which departments, up to what amount. So at this point, they have rolled out and they are live. And in addition to helping assess whatever new features might be required, Ellen, along with Katie Whitwer, who is here with her today, also helps train new users into using the system and also acts as one of the administrators. So without further ado, Ellen.
Thank you. All right, I passed the first test. So my name is Ellen Borowiak. I'm at St. Louis University. Carey told you a little bit about me, but I want to tell you a bit about SLU, just because I think the environment that we rolled out the contract management system is important. So we're a Jesuit university in St. Louis. We also have a campus in Madrid, Spain. There's approximately 13,000 students, 2,300 faculty members. We have a medical practice of about 600 physicians, and then a large research enterprise. It's a very diverse university. There's a lot of business practices, different processes, different priorities. We have an athletics department, and we have a surgery department. And so the system that we rolled out had to meet all of those needs. And so that was one of the sort of the challenges in the environment that we rolled out Agiloft in. There was a group of people from across campus about 2.5 years ago that got together. Long story short, a contract was signed by someone that shouldn't have been signing contracts, and it gave access to our network to someone that hadn't been vetted or anything like that. So there was a group of people that got together from across campus to figure out how we could do contracting better. So I work in business and finance, so report up through the CFO. Our Office of General Counsel has been a key stakeholder. Our IT department, so this is not an IT-led project, but obviously we need IT support and have relied on them for the success of the project. And then we had a number of gatekeepers. These are really teams across campus that needed to be looped into the contracting process before a contract was signed as compared to after the contract was already signed. Are any of you guys in higher ed? So it's fairly decentralized, and what had been happening is the contract would be signed by someone locally, and then someone would have to, maybe in the IT department, would have to then operationalize it, and so that created a lot of inefficiencies. So we had a number of gatekeepers, our information security team, our HIPAA compliance team, export controls. They were all some of the key stakeholders. So I mentioned I'm in business and finance. We work very closely with the Office of General Counsel. We meet with them regularly. But business and finance are the administrators of the system. I think we have a large institutional knowledge sort of about what those practices are in athletics, in surgery, and sort of all of the departments in between. And we had that knowledge sort of coming into the project, so it made a lot of sense for us to be the administrators. IT has been involved in the project. Around 2.5 years ago, they were in the process of centralizing a lot of functions and then outsourcing some of the support that they provide. And so for those reasons, they didn't really have the bandwidth to sort of be the administrators of the system. And so see. Ours is a cloud-based system. High on our list of requirements was integrations with other companies for asset tracking. So originally, this project was we were going to be able to track assets from the time of contracting through the purchasing system, and then from service ticket perspective and ServiceNow. So we use Unimarket for our purchasing system. We are in the process of moving ERP systems from Banner. We're migrating to Workday. And so for that reason, really the ERP system and the changing system there, we've put the asset tracking on hold, but we have started to sort of, you'll see that in the what's next. We are going to start those conversations up again. But integrations with other companies was high on our list of requirements. So our business drivers, we wanted to standardize practices across the university to the extent possible. We needed to meet the needs of all of as Carey mentioned, I think there's 300 or 400 different departments that are using Agiloft. We had to meet all of their needs and try to standardize practices. We wanted to provide transparency to end users, mitigate risk, so that contract that was signed without any review by someone that shouldn't have been signing contracts, we wanted to make sure that didn't happen. Create efficiencies, both on primarily on the operations side, but then also for those gatekeeper approvers, that they had one portal to sort of go to manage their approval process. Support operations, and then integrate the contract management system with the purchasing system. So wanted to give you guys a couple different examples of some of the types of contracts that we were working with, some of the types of scenarios that problems we had to solve. So this is just the first use case. It's a purchase agreement for a high dollar piece of medical equipment. It collects protected health information, and it connects to SLU's network. So pretty high risk, pretty high dollar. A business manager in that department would get the contract, who would route it to a contract manager. Based on that contract manager's institutional knowledge and training, if they had that knowledge and training, they would send it on to various approvers. Oftentimes that would just be the Office of General Counsel. They might not necessarily know that they needed to send that to the compliance office. That because it connected to our network, they also might need to send it to information security. So whatever approvers received the contract, hopefully then one of them would know to send it to those other teams, but maybe not. Once they had completed their review, and they would send that back to the contract manager, who was then tasked with incorporating all of those changes before sending it on to the business manager to make sure that met the business manager's needs, before sending it on to the department approver, getting it signed by someone who is hopefully an approved signer, and then routing it on. There was a lot of duplications, there was a lot of touch points, and it was not very efficient. Another use case, though, so this is a service agreement. It's a low-dollar photographer. Our development office is having an alumni event. So the university has utilized print templates. We have, I think, 5 or 6 built into the system now, and one of them is our standard service agreement. This agreement predates Agiloft, but what would happen is the department business manager would pull that standard service agreement. They might pull it from the business and finance or general counsel website, and so in that case, it would be the most up-to-date contract. They might also pull it from their desktop. They might pull it from maybe someone down the hall, which may or may not be the most up-to-date version. That person would manually enter vendor and payment details into the contract. Hopefully, they would send it for approval if there was any changes to the agreement, and then it might be signed by someone that was an authorized signer, but maybe not. So for both use case 1 and use case 2, the high risk, low risk, we wanted to make sure that contracts got the level of review that they required, but not any more than they needed. You know, that low risk photographer, we don't need a lot of people looking at that. That should be processed fairly quickly. We wanted to ensure that end users were using the most current approved contracts and ensure that contracts were signed by the appropriate people. So we issued an RFP to 6 companies, standard RFP with a long list of technical requirements and business requirements. Agiloft scored high on the technical requirements, and then in the demos to the selection team, they scored high on the ease of use, potential for customization, and support during implementation. So we kicked off with Agiloft in October 2017. It took us a good year to sort of figure out what our needs were. to sort of understand who needed to be involved in that process of approving contracts, who should be involved in that process, to get some buy-in from some of those departments that maybe were a little reticent to change their practices. So we configured the system over the course of this year with Carey and Craig. In September of 2018, Carey visited St. Louis. She had a train the trainer session and a working session with all of the Step 1 approvers. We launched with 5 departments. So it was IT, surgery, purchasing, family and community medicine, and our Doisy College of Health Sciences. So fairly representative group. We launched in the fall of 2018. Shortly thereafter, we did full training. So presently, we have implemented about 75% of the departments around campus. So I think there's about, I don't know, would you say 25 or so that we still need to implement. Those are the research-related contracts. So all of our academic units, our School of Medicine and Physicians group, and all of our administrative units, the facilities teams, the IT, the business services. So those are all using the system right now. So one of the ways that we tackled some of those issues that I presented earlier was we have 3 distinct workflows built into the system. So when there's a user that has a contract, whether it's a contract that they want to generate from the system, whether it's a contract that a third party sends them, they go into an online, into the online database, and there's an online intake form. The answers to the various questions that they provide on that intake form will dictate what teams need to approve a contract. So we have contract type workflows. I'll go into these in a little bit more detail. But contract type workflows, intake question workflows, and then department workflows. These first 2 aren't really very customized across the enterprise. So if I have an athletics agreement, I'm going to answer the same question about what type of contract this is as the facilities department, as an academic unit. And similarly, with the intake question, we have about a dozen, probably, questions built into the intake form that were developed by teams across campus. The answers to those questions will dictate whether those teams review the contract. The department, let me go back for a minute. The department workflows are very customizable. And so that's been really helpful for us to increase adoption. I'll get into that in a little bit. So the contract type workflows. We have about 30 different contract types that are built into Agiloft. Like I mentioned, it's a very diverse university, and we're doing a lot of different things. So of that 30, I think about 12 have a special team that approve them. So for example, if I want to enter into a real estate lease, I want to make sure that our facilities team and our real estate team gets notified of that early on in that process, rather than sort of getting a signed copy of it after the fact, which has happened. So purchasing department would review a purchasing-related agreement. A lot of the facilities-related agreements would go to either construction or to real estate. Material transfer agreements. So they're a small subset of our research contracts that we want to make sure get routed to a specific team. The locum tenens, for if we're hiring a temporary physician for something, we want to make sure that our practice management office has visibility into that so that they can get that doctor credentialed, make sure that they've passed sort of everything that they've done then they're ready to go. So like I mentioned, we developed a series of questions on our intake form. I didn't develop them. The various gatekeeper teams across campus developed them. So these is just, so information security, Office of General Counsel, our healthcare compliance office, export controls, and the answers to these questions may trigger a review by that team. So if it's a foreign vendor, our export controls team is going to review that contract. Similarly, if the contract concerns PHI, PCI, FERPA, any of those sort of regulatory concerns, if the contract contains those, then we want to make sure that those are reviewed by the appropriate teams across campus. And then our department workflows. So if I enter a contract into the system, I would expect that my boss would review that before he either signs it or it would be sent to his boss for signature. So these are very customizable. This is just our facilities design and construction. What this has really allowed us to do is sort of meet with the various departments across campus, understand what their current practices are and their current processes are, and try to sort of help use the system to support those practices. So there are some units that say, you know what, I need to see, a vice president, let's say, needs to see every contract that comes through for that department. We can make sure that that contract gets to him or her. There are other divisions that say, I don't want to see anything under $200,000. Okay, we can do that. And so we've really been able to sort of work with those departments, figure out what their needs are. This has been, well, it's good and bad. It's been really good. We have high levels of adoption. It's been really time consuming. It's Katie and I are sort of the main administrators of the system, and it does involve quite a bit of our time to sort of understand what those needs are and then figure out how the system can support them. But our main goal was making sure that people were adopting and using the system. So for that, it's been really good. So for those of you that are visual, this request submitted, when someone completes that online intake form, they click the submit button. The various contract type approvals and intake question approvals are queued up. There can be, I think, Carey, you would know the answer, probably like 12 to 15 potential. I mean, for that complicated piece of healthcare equipment, we want to make sure that that's been through the ringer, so to speak, in terms of getting the approvals that it needs. There could be none, though, for that standard service agreement. So it really just does, it's allowed us to sort of make sure that we're meeting the needs of all of the different types of departments and contracts that we have. Then the department contract manager is vetted or tasked with making sure that that contract has been reviewed appropriately, negotiating with that third party before then they route it on for department approvals and signature. So in that use case that I talked about earlier, the purchase agreement for the high dollar piece of equipment, the department administrator would enter that online intake form. The system would automatically queue up the various teams that might need to review and approve it. Before the contract manager would get an email letting them know that all of those approvals now have been generated, the contract has been edited. So they come out of this process with one version of the document instead of that contract manager having to go in and sort of reconcile all of those changes. It gets approved by the department and then sent via DocuSign, which I'll get into in just a minute, to the authorized signer. So this is actually a snapshot from our development KB, sort of for this exact scenario. So this SLU care approval. So it was an agreement that originated in our School of Medicine for certain contract types within the School of Medicine, mainly those that have a financial component. This team wanted to approve it sort of at the beginning. That was sort of, it's a department workflow that maybe is a little bit different than some of the others. But they wanted to make sure that from a financial perspective it made sense. It's a purchasing related agreement, so business services is going to review it. And then the answers to these questions, general counsel, compliance, and information security, the answers that that person submitted on the intake form now mandates that those teams all have to review and approve the contract. Kevin Riordan is this step 2. So once these people have all reviewed it, Kevin would get an email letting him know that now he has to send that contract to the third party or send it on to the chair of the department for their approval before then the contract manager would send it on for DocuSign. So the second use case, the low dollar photographer taking pictures at the alumni event. Department administrator would enter the online intake form. They would answer the same questions as that high dollar piece of equipment. If there was any approvals that were needed, it's a print template, so there's often not a lot of approvals that are needed. That person then, so if there were any approvals that were needed, they would happen before the contract manager would then get the contract and then route it on for signature. This is actually for that case, or that there were no step 1. There was no, because it was the template, there was no changes to the template. Everyone at the university has already agreed on that language and that's okay to use. So in this case, it just needs department approval. The contract manager would get it. And then this is in our student development office. and they've set up their department approver so that they all go to this team who can review it from a financial perspective to make sure that we're contracting for things that we have the budget for. So the signature process, Carey mentioned it. It was kind of the Wild West before Agiloft. And Agiloft really, and then DocuSign really gave us an opportunity to sort of take a fresh look at who can sign contracts, who should be signing contracts. And so we've configured Agiloft to using the following filters. So for those people that are authorized to sign contracts, there's 3 filters: the dollar amount, the contract type, and the department and the division. It was a process that had been managed by our Office of General Counsel with the adoption of Agiloft and Katie and I being in business and finance. That process is now owned by us. So we met with all of the various vice presidents across campus to understand what their business needs were, who needed to sign contracts. It gave us a chance to sort of standardize that across the university. It was helpful because then, those are the people that we can then rely on, that if they get a contract from someone in their department, asking them to wet sign it, let's say, they can push back and say, no, I just had this meeting about DocuSign and Agiloft, so I want my contracts to come that way. So it was helpful from that perspective. I wish this was bigger. There is a huge matrix that lives on my desk and will eventually live on SLU's webpage or intranet. And this is just sort of an example of, so E55 is our executive level, our Vice President for Enrollment and Retention Management. She is authorized to sign all contracts from E55, so that's the division. She's authorized to sign all contracts up to $250,000. With very few exceptions, that's the limit that most vice presidents across campus can sign. There's a couple people that can sign all contracts across campus. But you'll see then, these are some of the contract types that we've built into the system. Kathleen Davis, as the head of Enrollment and Retention Management, really has no need to ever see a clinical services agreement. She shouldn't be signing them if she ever would to get one. And so we've been able to sort of block her, not that she would want to sign them, but we've been able to sort of configure the system such that she wouldn't even be an option for someone that was trying to route a clinical services agreement. So we've really been able to sort of customize who can sign contracts. This next one next to Kathleen, it's an assistant vice president who can sign things for 2 departments that are under that E55 up to $10,000. There are certain, when we get down here into some of the real estate agreements, there's, I think, 3 or 4 people around campus that are authorized to sign real estate related agreements. And so, but then there's other contract types, these standard service agreements. I think everyone around campus can sign them up to, not everyone around campus, all authorized signers can sign them up to some dollar threshold. So we've really been able to sort of configure the system to meet the needs of the various departments, but also sort of standardize across the enterprise. So before DocuSign, so I should mention, along with sort of purchasing Agiloft, we purchased an enterprise-wide license for DocuSign through a GPO. So we're using DocuSign through Agiloft, and then Katie Whitwer is also the DocuSign administrator. So there's other applications of DocuSign that we're looking at and exploring. So prior to DocuSign, someone would get an approval packet with all of those printed off emails from general counsel, maybe from information security. They would have a big stack of them. They'd print the final contract. They would add those stickers. They'd walk it up the hill, deliver it to the signer. SLU would sign it. Hopefully they would be able to email it to the other party. Sometimes they would have to actually have the other party come in or physically sign it. And then it would inevitably live in a filing cabinet. I think there was one division around campus that had a repository for contracts prior to Agiloft, but not many did. Some people used a shared drive, but a lot of people just used a filing cabinet. So after DocuSign, once a contract is in an approved status, we can create an envelope within Agiloft. It will give you a pre-selected list of people that can sign the contract based on these filters. You can place the tags, SLU would sign it, countersigns, it lives in Agiloft. All of that history is preserved then, so the negotiation then with the third party. I think we're seeing a lot of benefits from Agiloft already. I think over the years, one of the things that we'll see is that all of that institutional knowledge is now preserved, right? So if I leave the university tomorrow and my successor is trying to negotiate a contract 2 years from now, they'll have all of that history there. They won't be having to search it through someone's email or something like that. So I think that's really one of the benefits. So I mentioned we're going to be onboarding research. They have some very unique contract types and contract routing. We did quite a bit of work, and right now there's a file that is sent from Agiloft to Unimarket, our purchasing system. We are going to be doing some more work in terms of exploring integrations with Workday, which is going to be then our new financial system of record. And we're going to try to roll out some advanced features of Agiloft, such as the clause library. I mentioned we have 5 or 6 print templates that we're using now. We'd like to expand that because they really just make things a lot easier and more efficient. So we have one system across campus. There's sort of an online one portal for all of those approvers. They can go in, they can see what's queued up, they can see when it got queued up. Like I mentioned, that preservation of institutional history, I think, will be, over the course of time, one of the greatest values. All of our workflows are automated. We can ensure that contracts receive appropriate review, standardized review, but they can still be customized to meet the various needs of the departments. There's a lot of visibility. So pre-Agiloft, someone would email general counsel a contract. Maybe a week later, they'd email and say, hey, where is that contract? And general counsel, oh, I had to send it to this team. And so now an end user can just log into the system and sort of see who's queued up to review and approve a contract, see where it is in that process. If they need something expedited, they can email that person within the system and request that that's be expedited. And we have a lot greater control on our signature process. Couple points. So executive level support is critical. Having both the CFO and general counsel on board with the project, I just don't think that it would have been successful without that. But in addition to that, sort of having all of those vice presidents that do sign contracts then start to push back on people that bring them contracts outside of the system has been. It wouldn't have worked if there's certain divisions or departments that are still wet signing contracts. For diverse business segments, expect workflows, customization. I just think that really in terms of getting people to use the system, we could have built the best system in the world. I think we did. But if people aren't going to be using it, then it doesn't really matter. And I would plan for upfront funding changes. Upfront funding for future system changes. So people they've been excited about the system. They want to do different things within the system, which is great. We just have to figure out it's Katie and I, we're really it. So between our time, does it make sense for us to do it? Does it make sense to hire Agiloft to do it? We just need to we're still trying to figure out some of that. And then establish governance and controls prior to implementation, both for Agiloft and then if you guys would be using DocuSign for any sort of e-signature platform. There's a beautiful view of SLU's campus at night. Feel free, if you think of any questions, to email me. My email address is up there, but I'm happy to answer any questions now. I do want to introduce, so I mentioned Katie Whitwer is another system administrator. She came on board sort of right as the project was kicking off and has a wealth of technical and project management experience that we just wouldn't be where we are without Katie. So if you guys have a super technical question, I'm going to punt to Katie. So with that, thank you. Yeah.
Hi, first, thank you. Your presentation was very insightful. I heard a lot of similarities to what we're facing. A couple of questions.
Yeah.
So for your approval and signature workflow cleanup of current state and redesign for future, what was Carey's role or what was Agiloft's role in the facilitation of that and the assistance and consultation of that versus you guys making those business decisions prior to her onboarding?
So I think Carey's role was really to be patient with us as we answered some of those questions internally. It was helpful for us to understand sort of and have her guidance to understand what the various roles were within the system. So we have, whether someone's a contract creator, contract manager, what type of approver they might be. It was helpful to understand that, but we really needed to sort of make those decisions in terms of who could sign contracts and who needed to be looped into the approval process outside of Agiloft.
Okay, great. And then when either of those workflows,
Yeah.
any of them, change, in your organization, who did you decide would change those? From an admin perspective, system? Okay.
Yeah, so we haven't made, I think we made one change to the intake question workflow. We sort of separated out risk management, and now we have a separate professional liability risk management team. So that was one big change. We've added a couple contract types. Different people say, oh, I'd like to see this sort of earlier on in the process. Other than that, we haven't made too many changes to those. The department workflows, though, Katie and I change. And
Yeah, like for approvers and signature workflows, we're contemplating potentially giving some of that power to power users out in the departments. I don't know if you Carey, have seen that before, or if you guys contemplated that versus handling all those requests yourself when someone leaves or someone transfers and now it needs to go to Larry and not Steve.
Yep. It's a lot. I mean, and I think, so we have sort of an online sort of submission process.
Okay.
And so we have like a Google Doc that then, Katie and I sort of will check and whatnot. I think one of the benefits of having that sort of long rollout has allowed us to sort of really work and talk to the departments. And so in that way, they kind of know, like, hey, Ellen, I need someone else that needs to go to training. Can you tell me when the next one is? And so it's been helpful to have that long rollout.
That would be so nice. I'm on the project of with M-Taurus being unplugged, so the one you guys have heard of earlier today. One last question. Yeah. It's just detailed, but that spreadsheet that you showed with all the yeses and nos, does that inform a table in Agiloft that's actually maintained in okay.
Yeah, so we felt, SLU felt that it was helpful to sort of have visibility so that everyone at the university knew who could sign contracts. It was kind of a black box earlier and no one really had that knowledge. So we do maintain the spreadsheet and we do maintain sort of a Google Drive with all of the letters, because sometimes, someone will get a letter or a request from another party saying, hey, we need to see that you're authorized to sign this contract. So we do all of that, but then there's a signing matrix built into Agiloft that mirrors that.
Great, thank you, very helpful.
No problem.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay.
The intake questionnaire that you had up there, is that accessed by the departments through the end user interface, or does that require a staff license?
No, it's the end user interface.
Awesome.
Yep.
Those are the words I needed to hear.
Yep, good.
All the best words. Anybody else?
How did you get the executive level buy-in to be critical so that you could then get the end user buy-in because the executives were in?
I think that really came from a risk perspective. I think that, like I mentioned, there was a couple of contracts that were signed, and because we do have like the healthcare field, it's so heavily regulated, and the penalties are so high for violations that I think that was kind of the fear factor of, okay, if we're not tightening up this process and sort of at least showing a good effort, not to say that something couldn't happen, someone could get a contract and still wet sign it potentially, but that we, from the university's perspective, are making the effort to sort of clean that up. So I think that really helped them then buy into it. It also helps, so we report up to the CFO, and most of the administrative departments on campus, so HR, facilities, and IT all report up to him as well. And so that helps too, just in terms of the volume of people that report up to him.
Great. Yeah. Thanks.
Anyone else? Any thoughts on what your experience has been like being turned over the system and administering it yourself? Like what has that process been like? What successes have you had in being able to do things on your own? Have you surprised yourselves?
It's been a little, yeah. I mean, so I think Katie, it's been helpful to have Katie there because, as Carey well knows, I'm not an IT person. It's not my background. It's not my specialty. And so Katie has much more of that background. She's been doing quite a bit more in terms of the technical aspects, and I've been focused more on sort of the communication with departments and the training. It's definitely a learning curve, but I think now, a couple months into it, rewind 6 months or so, it's gotten easier.
And I would add, so one of the more interesting decisions we've made is to be, since we don't have a lot of IT support, so we triage any technical troubleshooting. So if a user contacts us, they basically report to us first, and we look at it and we try to troubleshoot for them. We escalate to the Agiloft support team if needed. So that really helps us kind of keep a handle on how everything's going. And while it does require more resources, more time on our end, I think it's helpful to really stay engaged and attuned to what users are experiencing. And we do I think we do actually a great job of dividing and conquering when we have a change request or swapping out, department chair leaves, adding that person in the system. So I think it's been, what it does is it really helps us know all the intricacies of the system, and that's beneficial.
So with the complexity of all the different business units that you went out to, what would be your recommendation between needing to know enough of all of them to be able to standardize and to do the first configuration to make it the most standard as possible versus then going and doing the individual, rollout business unit by business unit?
Well, I tip my hat to Ellen. Actually, she spent a lot of time meeting face-to-face with different departments and sitting down and really understanding their needs. And by doing that, we were able to, we have this general interface and general workflows, but then customizing it really for each academic unit or our SLU care organization. And I think that's been very helpful. And so that adds a personal touch, and then that also helps create efficiencies in the departments that maybe they don't need an department level approver because they're the signer or something like that. It's very helpful. It takes a lot more time, right? And I think the implementation as a result, maybe it's extended the timeline, but it's well worth it. The adoption rate is so much higher when you're able to do that.
And I would say figure out sort of in the beginning what your non-negotiables are. So for us, our general counsel wanted to be able to tell the board that every contract was asked these questions and had the opportunity to get these reviewed. Like that, and so that wasn't going to change regardless of whether, change is tough for people. And so, especially when they're used to sort of taking a contract and walking it down the hall. And so just having that, and you kind of ties into your question about executive support, like what are the things that are going to be really important to them, and then making sure then, yep, we can tweak that for you, but this has to stay, and sort of trying to find that balance.
We have time for like one more question. I'm not sure what time it is right now. Yep, we've got time for a little bit more. Anybody else? Yes.
Hi, my question has more to do with the DocuSign implementation. So we've been using it as well for several years now, but it's touchy. Like we have experience with it. If there's a wireless situation, it'll drop, and so now you've got an envelope that isn't working, et cetera, and you've got to go back in and start all over again. I was just wondering, is our experience unusual, or have you also had any issues?
I don't think we've had many issues like that.
Okay. Yeah, we haven't. The only issue with DocuSign is because we work with large healthcare organizations, BJC or Mercy, oftentimes the sender address for the envelope from DocuSign goes into their spam or junk. That is really the biggest hurdle, and so we're now trying to educate and inform our contracting partners. Hey, look for this contract's coming through, but it's DSE _NA3@DocuSign.net might look very different than what you're expecting. You maybe used to work with Mary Smith and you'd see it come from her on email, but now it's coming from DocuSign. But overall, I think our experience has been pretty.
Okay, so it's
Pretty
been robust. We've just had some
Yeah.
issues, and maybe it's more of our internal systems. But when you mentioned, change management and getting people away from walking down the hall and getting it signed, one of the things that DocuSign did provide for us, because once people realized between the workflows and DocuSign that they could use their phone, that just, okay, I'm happy now. I can do it at night. I can be on vacation.
It is.
Yeah,
huge.
that
That is
opened
a
up the
great
world.
point. We've
Yes.
seen, so yesterday, actually, while we were at the conference, we had a high priority contract that had to make it through the system by the end of the day and
Right.
hit all the approval groups and go through general counsel's office and then be routed for signature. And, we're able to assist remotely. It's amazing what, and it was signed within 30 minutes of it being routed to our chair of the
Exactly.
School of Medicine. I mean,
Yeah.
that part has been amazing.
That's what
awesome to
sold
see.
our teams. Once they saw that, and they no longer had to have a line of people sometimes at an offsite standing next to the senior leader saying, "We're offsite. I need you to sign all this stuff." Now that all went away. So
Yeah.
it was great.
Yeah.
One more, since you brought up DocuSign. Who actually, once approved, do you auto route to the signer, or the initiator has the ability to push that button and make that happen and sometimes walk it to them for the relationship purposes?
So the direction, we have a policy, like for internal signers, contracts should be signed via DocuSign. So if there is sort of an external party that wants to sign something using a wet signature, we can do that within Agiloft. We can sort of trigger the system to let it know that it's active. But the way it works is, so once it's in an approved status on that signature tab, then you can select an internal signer based on those pre-approved filters. So there are, I think I mentioned 2 people. It's the CFO and the general counsel. They always are on there because they can sign anything under the sun. But other than that, it sort of depends on the department, the dollar amount, the contract type. So there's a list of all of those people that could sign the contract. So the contract manager then selects that person. They select the external signer and create that envelope.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else? Okay. Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Katie.
Thanks.